Welcome to Story Tales. Please like this video and subscribe to Story Tales. I hope you enjoy the story. Let's begin. Mara Duval checked her watch as she pulled into the circular driveway of the Meacham house. 2 hours early. She'd finished her quarterly budget review faster than expected, and the thought of seeing Callie's face light up when she arrived had pushed her foot harder on the accelerator through the winding roads of Hollow Creek. The colonial-style house stood pristine against the backdrop of Douglas firs, its white columns and manicured lawn screaming quiet wealth. Patricia's black Mercedes sat perfectly centered in the driveway, not a speck of dust on its surface. Everything about the Meacham property demanded respect, from the brass nameplate by the front door to the imported stone walkway. Mara had learned to read spaces like other people read books. At 38, she'd spent years perfecting the art of emotional control, building systems and boundaries that kept chaos at arm's length. Her corporate operations job required precision, and she'd made that precision her armor against a world that had taught her early that safety came from being prepared, being invisible, being smart enough to stay 3 steps ahead. She knocked twice on the heavy oak door, then turned the handle. Patricia had told her to just come in when she picked up Callie. "We're family," she'd said with that smile that never quite reached her eyes. The sound hit her first. A thin wail, muffled but unmistakable. Callie's voice, broken and scared. Mara moved through the foyer, past the family photos arranged with military precision, past Patricia's collection of ceramic angels that watched with blank eyes. The crying grew louder as she approached the living room. She stopped in the doorway. Callie sat on the hardwood floor, her small body curved protectively around her left arm. Tears streaked her dirt-smudged face, and her breath came in shaky hiccups. Her party dress, the blue one with tiny flowers that she'd been so excited to wear, was torn at the shoulder. Silas Meacham stood 3 feet away, his hands shoved deep in his pockets, chin tilted up in defiance. At 10, he already carried himself with the entitled swagger of someone who'd never faced real consequences. His eyes held that particular gleam Mara recognized from her own childhood, the satisfaction of someone who just exercised power over someone smaller. Patricia emerged from the kitchen, dish rag in hand, moving with the measured pace of someone addressing a minor inconvenience. Gerald followed, his bulk filling the doorway, arms crossed over his barrel chest. "Oh, Mara." Patricia's voice carried just the right note of weary patience. "You're early." Mara's eyes never left her daughter. Callie looked up at her with the expression of someone drowning, reaching for a lifeline. "Mommy, what happened?" Mara kept her voice level, but her hands clenched at her sides. Patricia waved the dish rag dismissively. "Children being children. You know how it is." She probably said something to provoke him. Gerald nodded, his gray mustache twitching. "Boys have a hard time at this age. All that energy, nowhere to put it." Mara knelt beside Callie, careful not to touch the injured arm. Her daughter's eyes were wide, pupils dilated with pain and shock. "Tell me what happened, baby." "He pushed me down the stairs." Callie's voice was barely a whisper. "I was just getting my coat. He said I was stupid and pushed me." "She's exaggerating." Silas spoke for the first time, his voice carrying the bored tone of someone repeating a familiar script. "She fell. I barely touched her." Patricia moved closer, her presence somehow making the room feel smaller. "Children dramatize things, Mara. You know that. She needs to learn that actions have consequences." "What actions?" The words came out sharper than Mara intended. "She was being mouthy," Gerald said. His voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Talking back to Silas when he was trying to help her find her things. A little tumble might teach her some respect. Mara felt something cold settle in her chest. The same ice that had formed when she was 7 and her father had explained why her split lip was her own fault. When she was 12 and her mother had made her apologize to her uncle for making him uncomfortable with her questions about why he wanted to be alone with her. She needs to apologize for escalating things, Patricia continued, smoothing her perfectly styled blonde hair. "We can't have her thinking this kind of behavior is acceptable." Callie's good hand found Mara's arm. "Mommy, it hurts." Patricia's smile grew tighter. "Callie, honey, You need to say sorry to Silas for causing all this trouble. Mara's world narrowed to a single point of clarity. The same clarity that had gotten her through college on scholarship while working 3 jobs. The same clarity that had helped her build a career and a life where no one could hurt her the way she'd been hurt as a child. But this wasn't about her anymore. Callie. Patricia's voice carried a new edge. We're waiting. Callie looked at her mother, confusion and pain warring in her 9-year-old eyes. Then she looked at the 3 adults staring down at her, waiting for submission. I'm sorry, she whispered. Silas smirked. That's better. Mara stood slowly, her movements deliberate and controlled. She helped Callie to her feet, supporting her injured arm. We're leaving. Mara, really? Patricia's laugh held no warmth. Don't you think you're overreacting? Kid's roughhouse. It's normal. Mara met Patricia's eyes for the first time since entering the room. She saw no concern there, no guilt, no recognition that a child was hurt and afraid. Only irritation at having her afternoon disrupted. Thank you for watching her, Mara said, her voice perfectly polite, perfectly controlled. We won't be needing you to do that again. She guided Callie toward the door, one arm around her daughter's shoulders. Behind them, she heard Gerald's heavy footsteps. You're making a mistake, Mara, he called. Family is family. You can't just cut people out because of a little misunderstanding. Mara didn't turn around. She helped Callie into the car, buckled her seatbelt with gentle hands, and drove away without looking back. In the rearview mirror, she watched the Meacham house grow smaller. Patricia stood in the doorway, arms crossed, watching them leave with the expression of someone whose authority had been questioned for the first time in years. Mara didn't break down. She planned. The emergency room at Hollow Creek General buzzed with its usual Saturday afternoon chaos. Mara filled out paperwork while Callie sat beside her, cradling her arm and trying not to cry. The bright fluorescent lights made everything feel harsh and exposed. Callie Duvall, a nurse in purple scrubs, appeared, clipboard in hand. Dr. Reynolds, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and calloused hands, examined Callie with gentle efficiency. X-rays revealed what Mara had already suspected, a hairline fracture in the radius bone of Callie's left forearm. This isn't consistent with a simple fall, Dr. Reynolds said quietly, pulling Mara aside while Callie got her cast. The angle of the break suggests significant force was applied. Direct force. Mara nodded. Someone pushed her down concrete steps. Dr. Reynolds made notes in Callie's chart. I'm required to ask, is there anything else I should know about Callie's home situation? She's safe with me, Mara said. This happened at her grandparents' house. It won't happen again. The doctor studied Mara's face, reading the determination there. I'll include my observations in the report. You'll want copies for your records. Back home in their small but comfortable house on Maple Street, Mara settled Callie on the couch with her favorite blanket and a cup of hot chocolate. The cast covered Callie's arm from wrist to elbow, pristine white against her pale skin. Mom, Callie's voice was small. Did I do something wrong? Mara sat beside her daughter, careful not to jostle the injured arm. No, baby, you did nothing wrong. Then why did they want me to say sorry? The question hung in the air like smoke. Mara stared at the cast, seeing her own 7-year-old self sitting in a similar position, nursing a black eye while her father explained why she deserved it for mouthing off to her older brother. You need to learn respect, little girl. Family comes first. Always. And if you can't remember that, maybe a reminder will help. She remembered her mother's voice, tired and resigned. Just apologize, Mara. It's easier if you apologize. She remembered her therapist, Dr. Chun, 3 years ago when she'd finally found the courage to talk about her childhood. You buried the pain, but you turned it into systems. Your rules. Your control. That's not weakness. That's survival. But survival wasn't enough anymore. Not when it came to Callie. Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes, Mara said carefully. Sometimes they think that hurting someone smaller is okay because they're bigger or older. But it's not okay. It's never okay. Callie leaned against her mother's shoulder. Will they want to see me again? Mara's arms tightened around her daughter. No, baby. They won't. That night, after Callie fell asleep, Mara sat at her kitchen table with a legal pad and a pen. She wrote down everything. The time she'd arrived. The position she'd found Callie in. Every word spoken by Patricia, Gerald, and Silas. The doctor's assessment. The X-ray results. She created a file. She labeled it documentation. And she began a plan. Monday morning brought the familiar routine of getting Callie ready for school. Her daughter struggled with her backpack, the cast making simple tasks frustrating. "I can help," Mara said, adjusting the straps. "Emily's going to ask what happened," Callie said. "What should I tell her?" "The truth. Someone hurt you, and it wasn't your fault." Mara walked Callie to her classroom, then requested a meeting with the school counselor. Mrs. Foster, a woman in her 40s with graying brown hair and patient eyes, listened as Mara explained the situation. "I need this documented," Mara said, sliding copies of the medical report across Mrs. Foster's desk. "And I need to know if there are any changes in Callie's behavior or if she mentions this incident to anyone." Mrs. Foster made notes in Callie's file. "Has she talked about it at home?" "Some. She's confused about why she was blamed for getting hurt. I'm getting her into therapy this week." "That's good. Children process trauma differently than adults." Mrs. Foster looked up from her notes. "Are there safety concerns I should be aware of?" "Not at school, but the people who hurt her won't have access to her anymore." That afternoon, Mara made 2 phone calls she'd been putting off for months. Names she remembered from awkward family gatherings. Women who'd stopped bringing their daughters to Meacham events without explanation. Keena Travers answered on the 3rd ring. "Mara, it's been a while. I'm calling about something that happened at Patricia and Gerald's house this weekend." A long pause. "What kind of something?" "Silas hurt Callie. Pushed her down the stairs. They made her apologize for it." Keena's sharp intake of breath told Mara everything she needed to know. "Oh God, I was hoping. We stopped going to those things 2 years ago. What happened?" "Silas hit Emma at Christmas. Split her lip. Patricia said she must have done something to deserve it. That girls need to learn not to provoke boys." Keena's voice shook with remembered anger. "I was so shocked I didn't know what to say. We just left and never went back." "Would you be willing to write that down? What you saw, what was said?" "For what?" "To protect other kids. To make sure this stops." Another pause, longer this time. Yes, I'll write it down." Olivia Merritt was harder to reach, but when Mara finally got through, the conversation followed a similar pattern. 3 years ago, her daughter Sophie, then 6, had been too rough during a game with Silas. He'd grabbed her arm hard enough to leave bruises. When Olivia confronted Patricia, she'd been told that Sophie was overly sensitive and needed to toughen up. "We never said anything publicly," Olivia admitted. "Gerald sits on the hospital board. Patricia has connections everywhere. We just stayed away. But you'd be willing to document what happened? If it helps other children, yes." By Wednesday, Mara had 3 written statements, detailed medical records, and an appointment scheduled with Callie's new therapist. She'd also pulled Callie from any family events or unsupervised visits with the Meachams. Thursday evening, her phone rang. Patricia's name appeared on the caller ID. Mara let it go to voicemail. The message was short and sharp. "Mara, this is ridiculous. Gerald, and I need to talk to you about this misunderstanding. Call me back." Mara deleted the message and made another note in her documentation file. Friday brought a text from Gerald. "Family problems should stay in the family. Don't make this bigger than it needs to be." Mara screenshot the message and added it to her file. She didn't respond to either of them, but she kept documenting everything done on Saturday. Exactly 1 week after the incident, Mara sat at her living room watching Callie color with her right hand, working around the cast with determined concentration. Her daughter was learning to adapt, to work within the limitations forced on her by someone else's violence. But Mara was done adapting, done working around other people's cruelty and calling it family loyalty. She opened her laptop and began researching family law attorneys in the Portland area. Talia Kinross operated out of a glass-fronted office in downtown Portland, the kind of space that suggested competence without ostentation. Her handshake was firm, her questions direct, and her reputation for winning family law cases preceded her like a carefully maintained sword. "Tell me what happened," she said, gesturing for Mara to sit across from her polished desk. "Everything. Don't leave out details because you think they're unimportant. Mara laid out the facts like pieces of evidence at a crime scene. The incident, the medical report, the statements from other mothers, the threatening messages from Gerald and Patricia. Talia took notes on a legal pad, her pen moving in quick, efficient strokes. When Mara finished, the attorney leaned back in her chair and studied the documentation spread across her desk. "You don't have enough for a lawsuit yet," she said finally. "But you do have grounds to alert CPS. And you can cut off contact legally. That's not enough." Mara's voice was steady, but her hands gripped the arms of her chair. "They hurt my daughter and made her apologize for it. They'll do it again to someone else if nothing happens." Talia raised an eyebrow. "What exactly are you hoping to accomplish?" "Accountability. Consequences. I want them to face what they did." "That's more complicated. These people have money, connections, and no criminal record. The boy is a minor. And family court judges don't always see emotional manipulation as clearly as they should." Mara had expected this. "Then what do I need?" "More documentation. More witnesses. A pattern of behavior that can't be dismissed as a single incident." Talia tapped her pen against the legal pad. "You need to build a case that shows ongoing emotional abuse, systematic victim blaming, and potential danger to other children." "How?" "Medical reports, you have those. Therapist evaluations, get those. School counsel documentation, get that too. Witness statements, get more of them. And keep a detailed log of every interaction with these people. Every call, every text, every attempt at manipulation or intimidation." Mara nodded. "What about the other children? The ones who were hurt before Callie? If their parents are willing to come forward, that establishes a pattern. But be careful. These people will fight back once they realize what you're doing." Over the next 2 weeks, Mara built her case with the methodical precision she'd learned in her corporate work. She scheduled regular sessions with Dr. Martinez, Callie's new therapist, and requested written assessments of her daughter's emotional state. She met with Mrs. Foster weekly to document Callie's adjustment at school. She reached out to 3 more families, following threads of whispered conversations and remembered absences from family gatherings. 2 more mothers agreed to provide statements about Silas's aggressive behavior and the Meacham's response to it. Every evening after Callie went to bed, Mara sat at her kitchen table updating her incident log. She recorded the dates and times of missed calls from Patricia. She documented Gerald's attempts to contact her through mutual acquaintances. She noted the way other family members had suddenly stopped inviting her to gatherings. The log grew thicker. The documentation more comprehensive. Callie's cast came off after 6 weeks, but the psychological healing took longer. Dr. Martinez worked with her on understanding that being hurt wasn't her fault, that apologizing for someone else's violence wasn't required, that her feelings about what happened were valid and important. "She's remarkably resilient," Dr. Martinez told Mara during one of their parent consultation sessions. But the incident clearly affected her sense of safety around authority figures. She's learning to trust her own perceptions again instead of defaulting to adult approval. Is that normal for children who've experienced victim blaming? Unfortunately, yes. The good news is that she has a strong support system at home. You're teaching her that her version of events matters, that she doesn't have to minimize her own pain to keep other people comfortable. Dr. Martinez's official assessment, added to Mara's growing file, documented signs of trauma consistent with physical assault and subsequent emotional manipulation by trusted adults. That Mara's personal incident log now filled 2 legal-sized notebooks. Every interaction with the Meachams, every attempt at contact, every manipulation, every threat, every effort to make her doubt her own decision to protect her daughter. She had medical reports, therapist assessments, school counselor notes, witness statements from 5 different mothers, a detailed timeline of events, photo documentation of Callie's injuries. But she wanted more than protection. She wanted justice. The knock came on a Thursday evening while Mara was helping Callie with her math homework. Sharp, authoritative, the kind of knocking that demanded immediate attention. Through the peephole, Mara saw Patricia standing on her front porch, dressed in her usual armor of expensive clothes and practiced authority. Her face wore the expression of someone addressing a wayward employee who'd forgotten their place. Mara opened the door, but didn't step back to invite Patricia inside. "This is a misunderstanding," Patricia said without preamble, her smile bright and cold. "Silas is a boy. You can't expect perfection. He broke my daughter's arm. He's 10 years old. Children play rough. You're blowing this completely out of proportion." Patricia's voice carried the patient tone of someone explaining obvious facts to a slow child. "We raised 4 children, Mara. We know what normal behavior looks like." Mara kept her hand on the door frame, blocking Patricia's view of the interior. "Do not contact me again, and don't ever expect to see Callie." Patricia's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something sharp and ugly underneath. "You don't get to make that decision unilaterally. We're grandparents. We have rights. You have no rights to hurt children. We didn't hurt anyone." Patricia's voice rose, then immediately dropped back to its controlled register. "You're being emotional instead of rational. This family nonsense needs to stop before you do something you'll regret." Mara stepped back and closed the door without another word. Through the window, she watched Patricia stand on the porch for several minutes, her carefully composed facade cracking as she realized her usual tactics weren't working. The call started the next day. Patricia left voicemails that began friendly and grew increasingly frustrated as Mara failed to return them. Gerald sent texts that felt more like orders than requests. "We need to work this out like adults. You're hurting this family with your stubbornness. Callie needs her grandparents." Mara documented everything, but didn't respond. 2 days later, her ex-husband called. David's voice carried the weary tone of someone who'd been recruited for a job he didn't want. "Patricia contacted me," he said. "She thinks we should talk about Callie's living situation." Mara's blood went cold. "What about it? Maybe she should spend more time with my side of the family. Get some balance." "Patricia mentioned that you've been difficult lately." David had been largely absent from Callie's life by his own choice, content to pay child support and see his daughter on alternating weekends when his social calendar permitted. Now he was suddenly interested in custody arrangements. "Did Patricia suggest you should pursue more time with Callie? She mentioned that joint custody might be better for everyone. More stability." "Joint custody means scheduled visits, David. Visits that Patricia could attend as Callie's step-grandmother." Silence on the other end of the line. "Then, I don't want to get in the middle of this family drama." "Then don't. Nothing has changed with our custody arrangement. Nothing needs to change." Patricia seemed to think. "Patricia broke our daughter's arm and made her apologize for it. Whatever Patricia thinks about our custody arrangement is irrelevant." David's sigh carried clearly through the phone. "Look, I don't know what really happened, but maybe you're being a little extreme. Our daughter has medical records that say otherwise." After David hung up, Mara called Talia immediately. "He can't just decide to change custody without going through the courts," Talia assured her. "But if he files a motion, you'll need to respond." The good news is that his sudden interest in more time with Callie right after this incident would look suspicious to any judge. "What if he does file? Then we use all that documentation you've been building. We show that this is retaliation, not genuine concern for Callie's welfare." Mara prepared for war. The motion to restrict unsupervised family visitation took 3 weeks to prepare. Talia crafted it with surgical precision, each paragraph backed by documented evidence. "We're not accusing the minor child," Talia explained as they reviewed the final draft. "We're demonstrating that the environment is unsafe due to repeated emotional and physical disregard for child safety." The supporting documentation filled a thick folder. Dr. Martinez's assessment detailing Callie's trauma and her professional opinion that continued contact with the perpetrators would be harmful. Mrs. Foster's notes documenting Callie's behavioral changes and statements at school. Medical records from the emergency room visit. Written statements from 5 mothers describing similar incidents with Silas and the Meacham's response. And Mara's meticulous incident log, documenting every interaction, every attempt at manipulation, every threatening phone call and text message. Judge Ashland has a reputation for prioritizing child safety over family unity, Talia said. She's seen too many cases where children were sacrificed to preserve adult relationships. The response from the Meacham's attorney came swiftly. A motion to dismiss, claiming that Mara was being vindictive and attempting to weaponize the court system against loving grandparents. They painted her as an overprotective mother who couldn't distinguish between normal childhood, roughhousing, and actual abuse. Standard defense, Talia said after reviewing their filing. They're betting that their social standing and the boys will be boys narrative will carry more weight than your evidence. Will it? Not with Judge Ashland. And not with this level of documentation. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for a rainy Tuesday in November. Mara sat in the courthouse waiting area, watching Patricia and Gerald confer with their attorney, a man in an expensive suit who radiated the kind of confidence that came from years of winning cases through intimidation rather than facts. Gerald wore his best suit and his most authoritative expression. Patricia had chosen an outfit that suggested maternal warmth while maintaining professional credibility. They looked like the kind of people who serve on school boards and hospital committees, the kind of people judges instinctively trusted. But Mara had something they didn't. She had the truth, and she had the documentation to prove it. When Judge Ashland called their case, the courtroom felt both too large and too small. Mara answered questions about the incident with calm precision, sticking to facts and avoiding emotional language. Talia presented their evidence methodically, building a picture of systematic victim blaming and disregard for child safety. The Meacham's attorney painted Mara as a vindictive ex-daughter-in-law, trying to punish her former in-laws for normal grandparent behavior. He described Silas as a typical boy going through a difficult phase, suggested that Callie's injury was an accident blown out of proportion by an overprotective mother. But when Dr. Martinez took the stand and described Callie's trauma responses, when Mrs. Foster testified about the child's statements at school, when the medical records were entered into evidence showing the deliberate nature of the injury, the narrative began to shift. When Keena Travers described watching Silas split her daughter's lip and hearing Patricia blame the victim, the courtroom grew very quiet. When Olivia Merritt testified about the bruises on her 6-year-old's arm and the Meacham's dismissive response, Judge Ashland's expression grew stern. By the time Talia finished presenting their case, the pattern was undeniable. Multiple incidents, multiple children. The same response every time: blame the victim, protect the aggressor, demand apologies from the injured parties. Judge Ashland's ruling was swift and decisive. Based on the evidence presented, I find that continued unsupervised contact between a minor child and the respondents presents a risk to her physical and emotional well-being. Full custody is confirmed with the petitioner. Respondents are barred from any contact with a minor child without prior court approval and professional supervision. She looked directly at Patricia and Gerald. Any future attempt to interfere with these parental boundaries will result in contempt of court charges. Outside the courthouse, Patricia's mask finally cracked completely. "This isn't over," she hissed as they passed in the parking lot. "You can't keep us from our granddaughter forever." Mara met her eyes with calm certainty. "Watch me." The ethics complaint against Patricia took 4 days to research and 3 drafts to perfect. Mara had learned that Patricia Meacham didn't just attend PDA meetings, she sat on the board of Greenwell Elementary, the same school that 3 of Silas's victims had attended. The complaint detailed a clear conflict of interest, a school board member who systematically dismissed reports of child abuse when they involved her grandson. Mara included copies of the witness statements, medical records, and court documents. She attached Dr. Martinez's assessment and Mrs. Foster's documentation. But the most damning evidence came from a conversation with Jennifer Walsh, whose daughter had been at Greenwell during Silas's brief enrollment there 2 years earlier. "Emma came home with scratches on her arms," Jennifer wrote in her statement. "When I asked the teacher about it, she said Silas could be physical, but that Mrs. Meacham was working on it. When I pushed for more information, suddenly Emma was the problem child. Too sensitive, disruptive. They suggested we consider other educational options." The pattern emerged clearly. Patricia had used her position on the school board to protect Silas and silence his victims. When parents complained, their children became problems to be solved through transfers and labels rather than by addressing the actual aggressor. Keena and Olivia co-signed the complaint, adding their own experiences with Patricia's abuse of authority. The document landed on the school board's desk on a Wednesday morning, copies simultaneously delivered to the superintendent and the district's legal counsel. That same day, an anonymous blog post appeared on Hollow Creek Community Voice, a local parenting forum that Patricia herself frequently used to share advice about child rearing and family values. The post was titled, "When Family Hides Abuse," and it told the story of a grandmother who prioritized image over child safety, who used her community connections to silence victims, who taught children that violence was acceptable as long as it came from someone with more power. The teen never mentioned names. It didn't need to .by Thursday morning. The post had been shared 47 times. Parents began commenting with their own stories, not about the Meachams specifically, but about authority figures who'd failed their children, about systems that protected aggressors while blaming victims. By Friday, Patricia's phone was ringing constantly. Board members wanted explanations. The superintendent requested a meeting. Other parents were asking uncomfortable questions about incidents that had been swept under the rug. The ethics investigation moved with unusual speed. Dr. Martinez provided expert testimony about the psychological impact of institutional victim blaming. Mrs. Foster submitted records showing the pattern of children being transferred out of situations rather than having their safety concerns addressed. Within 2 weeks, the school board voted to request Patricia's resignation. The vote was unanimous. Patricia's other community positions began falling like dominoes. The hospital auxiliary board expressed concerns about her judgment. The community foundation quietly suggested she step back from her fundraising role. The country club, where she'd held membership for 20 years, suddenly found reasons to question her continued participation. That Gerald's business relationships grew strained as word spread through Hollow Creek's tight professional network. Clients began asking pointed questions about family values and child safety. Referrals dried up. Silas, meanwhile, had a new behavioral incident at school. This time, he pushed a younger boy off playground equipment, breaking the child's collarbone. When Patricia couldn't intervene on his behalf, couldn't make calls to board members, or suggest that the victim had somehow provoked the attack, the school's response was swift and professional. Silas was suspended pending a full behavioral evaluation. The recommendation came back clear. He needed intensive therapy and should be transferred to a school better equipped to handle children with aggressive behavioral disorders. The Meacham family, once pillars of Hollow Creek society, found themselves isolated and scrutinized. Their carefully maintained image cracked under the weight of documented truth. But Mara wasn't finished. The courtroom was smaller this time, designed for family matters rather than criminal proceedings. Judge Ashland reviewed the case file with the thoroughness of someone who understood that children's lives hung in the balance of her decisions. Patricia and Gerald arrived with their attorney, but the confidence they displayed at the preliminary hearing had been replaced by something tighter, more desperate. Patricia's usual perfect composure showed stress fractures around her eyes. Gerald's authoritative bearing had given way to the defensive posture of someone whose power had been questioned and found wanting. Mara sat beside Talia. Her own documentation now expanded to include everything that had happened since the initial court order. Patricia's resignation from the school board. The ethics investigation findings. The blog post that had sparked community-wide discussions about child safety and institutional accountability. Your Honor, Talia began, we're here to address multiple violations of the court's previous order restricting contact between the respondents and the minor child. She presented evidence of Gerald's attempts to contact Mara through mutual acquaintances. Patricia's efforts to use David as a proxy for regaining access to Callie. Their coordinated campaign to undermine Mara's credibility within the community. The Meacham's attorney painted their actions as the desperate efforts of loving grandparents trying to maintain a relationship with their granddaughter. He suggested that Mara was vindictive, that she was using the court system to punish his clients for a single childhood accident. But when Dr. Martinez took the stand again, her testimony carried new weight. Callie had made remarkable progress in therapy once the threat of forced contact with her abusers was removed. The child had stopped having nightmares. She'd regained confidence in her own perceptions of safety and danger. Forcing this child to resume contact with the respondents would undo months of therapeutic progress, Dr. Martinez stated. In my professional opinion, the minor's psychological well-being requires permanent protection from individuals who have demonstrated a pattern of victim blaming and emotional manipulation. Mrs. Foster testified about Callie's improvement at school. The child who had once been anxious and withdrawn after the incident now participated actively in class discussions and playground activities. She learned to trust adults again because the adults in her life had proven trustworthy by protecting rather than sacrificing her. The school counselor from Greenwell Elementary provided testimony about the ethics investigation, detailing how Patricia's position on the school board had been used to silence reports about Silas's behavior. Multiple incidents, multiple children, a systematic pattern of institutional cover-up. Keena Travers and Olivia Merritt testified again, this time with additional details about how they'd been pressured to stay quiet, how their children's educational opportunities had been threatened when they tried to speak up. The mother whose son Silas had injured on the playground testified about the difference in institutional response once Patricia no longer held power to interfere. Professional handling, appropriate consequences, support for the victim rather than protection for the aggressor. Judge Ashland listened to 6 hours of testimony with the patience of someone who understood that justice required thoroughness. When Meacham's attorney attempted to characterize his clients as victims of a vindictive campaign, Judge Ashland's expression grew cold. "Counsel, I've reviewed extensive documentation of your client's behavior toward multiple children over several years. The evidence shows a consistent pattern of prioritizing their grandson's convenience over other children's safety. They have used their community positions to silence victims and enable continued aggression. This is not a case of misunderstanding or overreaction." She looked directly at Patricia and Gerald. "You have demonstrated that you cannot be trusted to prioritize child welfare over family loyalty. Your actions have shown that you view violence against children as acceptable when it serves your interests." The ruling was comprehensive and final. Full custody confirmed with Mara, with no visitation rights for the Meachams. Any future contact would require court approval, professional supervision, and evidence of significant behavioral change, including completion of a family therapy program focused on child safety and victim advocacy. Gerald was banned from any volunteer positions involving children. Patricia was permanently barred from serving on school boards or child-focused community organizations. Any future attempt to interfere with these parental boundaries or to contact the minor child will result in contempt of court charges and possible criminal prosecution for stalking and harassment. Judge Ashland's final words carried the weight of absolute authority. The court's primary responsibility is protecting children, not preserving adult relationships that have proven harmful to those children. Outside the courthouse, Patricia and Gerald walked to their car in silence. Their attorney had already discussed the futility of appeals. The documentation was too thorough, the pattern too clear, the harm to multiple children too well established.